October 22nd, 2022. This is episode 52 of the In a Nutshell podcast. I'm your host, Sean Vowells, and as usual, I'm joined by Joe Meade. Tonight, Joe and I will go over the Week 8 action, which included a number of surprising results, a couple upsets, and we'll get to all of it here. Joe, we are going to start with the game that happened on Friday night. Now, not a significant one in the grand scheme of things. Oregon does go to West Lafayette. They take care of Purdue 35-0. The Boilers can't really replicate any sort of positive momentum from their decent effort against Illinois. But Joe, Oregon takes care of business here, and now they're the new number one overall team.
Yeah, Sean, I think if we're going to speak strictly of the game, most podcasts tried to fool you. Some, I don't know, for whatever reason, tried to get you to watch this game on Friday night. Admittedly, I tried to pay as little attention to this game as possible, even though we do this show. Ultimately, the spoiler makers thing, not this year, to be very clear. No, not this year to this degree, I should say. I think they still have 5 more opportunities to perhaps live up to that name. But for now, Sean, 35-0 Oregon. Really an insignificant game, to be honest. Dylan Gabriel, 21 of 25. Pretty decent stats for a blowout. I wish they got Dante Moore in there to take some second-team reps. I thought that was a little silly. I thought perhaps you could get him ready should catastrophe strike and Dylan Gabriel not be available for a game or two, because I do think as the long seasons go on, especially as you saw with Texas earlier this year, you might be forced to use 2 quarterbacks. I think that'd be my one criticism of the Ducks, because other than that, it was a pretty efficient performance. I wouldn't say it's their best performance. It was just a situation where they wanted to go there on a Friday night, get in, get out with no incidents, and luckily for them, that earned them the number 1 ranking with all the other chaos going on in college football.
And they are one of 2 teams that sit at 4-0 in the conference, and we will get to the other one in a couple minutes here, Joe. Actually, it's the next one up on the list here. That's the Indiana Hoosiers. Big Ten noon kickoff comes into town. The whole Fox crew is there. All the hype is around Cignetti and the Hoosiers, and they live up to it. 56-7 over the Cornhuskers. Curtis Rourke gets them going in the first half. He does leave at halftime with a thumb injury. We'll talk about that later. But, Joe, even in the second half, with most of the starters out, Indiana kept it rolling. And my goodness, what a statement this one was.
Yeah, Sean, I think there's 2 angles to look at this. First, I think you mentioned it, Rourke. That's the one negative thing. Let's just start off with it right away, because I don't want to take anything away from the Hoosiers. I think their fans should be feeling really good. And that includes even with the injury, Sean. I look at their upcoming schedule. I think where it becomes an issue past this weekend, we could talk about that at a later time, because I certainly wouldn't want to speculate or waste time talking about speculation. Shifting over to the Nebraska side, this is probably what your worst nightmare was, not for the season as a whole, but for a performance with a true freshman quarterback. Dylan Raiola certainly lived up to that billing as a true freshman in this game. 3 interceptions, really didn't look comfortable back there. Only averaged like 5 yards per completion. Just a guy who looked completely lost out there. Got to the point, Sean, where you thought they had a chance a little in the first half, but that second quarter completely blew it out of proportion. The third and fourth quarter were no better. And, Sean, sadly, this is going to be a common theme today. I think a lot of the teams we gave credit to, or that really deserved credit at the beginning of the year, Nebraska, Rutgers, and a few more teams we'll talk about, this was not a good week for them. Nebraska, I think you could kind of explain away the Illinois loss, especially the way Illinois has looked in the weeks since. Losing 56-7, albeit Indiana looks like a top 10 team right now. 56-7 as Nebraska, a blue blood program. That's not going to be acceptable when it's against Ohio State, Michigan last year even, or a Penn State. So definitely a lot of digging deep for Nebraska this coming week. They're going to need it. We'll talk about that in the later part of the episode. But I do want to highlight this was a really disappointing performance all around, not only from the offense, but the defense to get dominated the way Indiana did. This was probably the best defense we thought Indiana would face, and they made it look like a junior varsity high school defense.
And that was certainly the takeaway, but also the other side of the ball, Joe. With we talked about Indiana's defense not really facing a good quarterback yet, somebody who maybe could expose some weaknesses in the secondary. I mean, there was none of that. And the Hoosiers didn't give them much. The Nebraska touchdown was a pretty long, sustained drive, so not like a huge play that they gave up, which the Hoosiers are susceptible to in the past. But the Indiana ground game is in a really solid place too, kind of going under the radar with how great Rourke has been and how good the receivers have been. But a bunch of rushing touchdowns, and it's going to be Tateman Jackson's season in Bloomington for the time being. And we will talk about their game this weekend on the next episode. But, Joe, as long as it's only a couple games, you have to think that the Hoosiers should be able to manage without Rourke.
Yeah, I certainly don't want to get ahead of it because I think Washington, they're still a touchdown favorite. We'll get into this later, but I do think if it lingers, especially I'm looking specifically at the November 2nd matchup at Michigan State, that could be a big issue specifically for that game. I don't want to get melodramatic and call this any kind of monumental injury, but I think for now, I think Indiana's taking it week by week, as so should the people who preview this and the fans. So,
Taven's been good when he's been in there, but it has been in about as low stress as you could get. Up next, Joe, one of the other noon games. Wisconsin goes to the Windy City to play Northwestern, and the Badgers are starting to put together a little bit of an impressive run. 23-3 over the Wildcats. Jack Lausch extremely inconsistent, and the Badgers leaning on their defense and their running game as they are all of a sudden 5-2.
Yeah, Sean, again, this is kind of the script flip from Nebraska. Wisconsin did not start the season well at all. I think the performance against Alabama, you could talk to me all about how that's aged, being that Alabama's lost 2 games, albeit Alabama's lost 2 close games to 2 top 25 teams, so I don't really think that's that bad a loss still. USC, the way they got dominated in the second half, it was really discouraging, but the way they rebounded, just blowing out 3 teams, and to be honest, Sean, I thought the Rutgers game was going to be a game they lost. They blew them out of the water, as we discussed last week. And Northwestern, this is a game Wisconsin's had trouble with the past few meetings, losing to them last year, 2020. Northwestern's a team that Wisconsin seemed to have struggled with of late through 2 different coaching eras, but not on Saturday. The Wisconsin defense, it was a typical Luke Fickell defensive performance. Northwestern didn't even do that bad a job. They only lost the ball once. Wisconsin just did not allow them to go down the field at all. Albeit Wisconsin's offense not too impressive, but also this was a Wisconsin offense that got in its own way for the beginning part of the season. And as we've seen, Sean, I think they have more. It's certainly safe to say they have more talent than the last 3 opponents they've had. And by staying out of their own way on offense, they've trusted the defense, and it's led to really good results. I think at 5-2, 3-1 in the conference, there's certainly a lot ahead for Wisconsin. Now, they do have Penn State this week. They do also host Oregon, and they're at Iowa. So that is kind of a murderer's row, and at Nebraska. Those are 4 games they could potentially lose. So I don't want to get too ahead of Wisconsin. I think they should enjoy themselves for now. I think since that USC game, they've played as well as they could have. But I do think even after the USC game, we would have favored them to win 2 of these 3 games. So I think it's good to pat yourself on the back, but I don't think they should kid themselves. They do play 2 of the top 3 teams in the next 3 weeks, so it's going to take a lot more than that to pull off some magic in Madison.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping for their sake that they did maybe get into the top 25 this week because they're going to have to play really well to win any of those games that you mentioned. But good for them. You lose your quarterback, you get blown out at home early on in the year, and then, nightmare scenarios start coming into play, and bottom of the barrel Big Ten becomes a real possibility. But at least for now, it looks like that they are avoiding that and getting into what's becoming a pretty messy middle of the pack here. And Joe, we're aiming to do our Big Ten power rankings next week, so that'll be after next weekend's games. It'd be interesting to see where they end up for both of us, because I don't even know if I know where I'm going to put them yet. But all right, up next, Joe, another noon game, the Fox Sports 1 game. The UCLA Bruins come all the way across the country to New Jersey to face the struggling Rutgers Scarlet Knights. Joe, we previewed it as a game that Rutgers really should win, and unfortunately for them, they did not. Ethan Garber's huge game for UCLA, 4 touchdowns, almost 400 yards passing. Monungai continues to impress for the Scarlet Knights, but that's about it. UCLA picks up their first win in the Big Ten.
John, what's really surprising is if you told me Kyle Monungai was going to rush for 3 TDs and over 100 yards, I probably would have chalked this up as a 2 or 3 score Rutgers victory. And that's what I thought this would be, really. I thought the Wisconsin game was as embarrassing performance as they could have had. And we said it last week, I think both of us. Aside from Purdue, UCLA is a team, especially at home, on a noon game, a 9 a.m. local for UCLA. This is kind of a game you wanted to see a really good performance and a rebound. This was the exact opposite. Sean, Athan Kaliakmanis, we've praised him a lot on this show. He needs to do a lot better. The last 2 games have not been it. No touchdowns, 1 interception. I know he's working his butt off running on the ground. He did score a rushing TD, but Sean, overall, I'm really disappointed in the Rutgers defense. Ethan Garbers is a guy, and I'm really happy for him on a personal level. The way UCLA was dominated through their first 6 games, let's face it, the win over Hawaii was not pretty. In fact, it was probably the ugliest win any Big Ten team has had, considering the opponent and considering the way they won. 4 TDs, no interceptions, a QBR of close to 100. Also on the ground, Sean, 9 carries for 48 yards, a rushing TD. He accounted for all their offensive TDs is the way I look at it. And they really had no help from Jalen Berger or TJ Harden. The longest run outside of the one from Ethan Garbers was 9 yards. So I think that speaks volumes as to what he's done for this offense. Keegan Jones, 5 catches for 114 yards. Really, the long bomb of 67 stands out. So, Sean, UCLA, really good on them, and it kind of shows that this conference kind of something we'll explore, and we've explored in Big Ten basketball in the past. The bottom of the conference is not necessarily lifeless. Now, is UCLA and Purdue going to beat an Oregon? It hasn't happened, and it didn't happen. It wasn't even close to happening. But for some of these middle-of-the-road teams, they're not pushovers, and if Rutgers expected that, I think they learned their lesson the hard way. And looking forward for Rutgers, this kind of puts a dimmer outlook on their season. We were talking, Sean, of a potential 8-9 win season for the Scarlet Knights. That's completely out the window. Now I think they have to salvage the season to go bowl eligible. But I see their next 5 games. I struggle to find that. I think aside from one, they won't be favored. The 2 winnable ones of the 5, USC, Minnesota at home, at Maryland, Illinois, and at Michigan State. Probably Minnesota and Maryland are your key opportunities to reach bowl eligibility again. So the darlings of the early season, just like Nebraska, are falling flat on their face. And as someone who grew up in New Jersey like you, Sean, it's disheartening to see for Rutgers because I'm starting to think that there might be a ceiling for that program, especially in this conference.
And the season's kind of slipping away, as you said, Joe. I was going to ask you, but you kind of already answered it. A bowl eligibility might be the best case scenario here, and that wasn't the case not that long ago. And there's a lot of buzz around Rutgers athletics with the basketball team and the 2 freshmen coming in, and it looked like the Rutgers was gonna sort of ride the coattails of that right into the basketball season. And a couple of, you have a tough loss in Lincoln. That was a tough weather day where it was a defensive battle. That really could have gone either way, but after that, Joe, 77 points given up in 2 games. And certainly not to 2 of the better offenses in the conference either. 2 teams that will win games because of their defense usually. But disappointing for Rutgers here, and good for UCLA. I do think they are better than Purdue. And they just showed a little bit on defense early on in the year, but they actually get the job done with a bunch of touchdowns. So good for them. They moved to 2-5 on the year. All right, up next, Joe, unfortunately, is your Michigan Wolverines. Now, this will probably take a while because there's a lot of stuff we got to talk about from this one, but it was more of the same from the Wolverines as Illinois knocked them off 21-7. Jack Tuttle continues to struggle, yet he is the quarterback 1 for now. Sharon Moore's come under question for a number of things, but Joe, I'll ask you this. I think that fake punt essentially ended the game. It looks like Michigan was going to get the ball back just down 1 score, and Illinois essentially takes it all the way in. A couple plays later, they punched it in to get that 2-score lead. That just felt like a gut punch.
Yeah, it truly was the gut punch shot, and I'm not trying to make a joke about Brett Bielema or his lower area, we'll call it, but there's something brewing down there. It took a lot more than his gut to go for that, and the way Michigan played it was completely pathetic. That's called fake punt territory. Anything north of the 30, a team's own 35
I, th-
yard line, and
I,
Michigan,
I think they may have even said so on the broadcast.
yeah,
You got to watch
I
out
think,
for something here. I think that was the
yeah.
words.
Yeah, and Brett Bielema being a disciple of Barry Alvarez, his famous quote saying, "You don't beat Michigan or Ohio State during the week; you beat them 365 days a year." That kind of game planning and that kind of mindset is what went into this game for Illinois. And I think Michigan's defense was not impressive, but I thought a lot better than it was against Washington. They were a lot more. A lot of people say vanilla. I think they took a lot less risks, and it ultimately paid off. And everyone's going to talk about Luke Altmaier. I think on the ground, he changed the game in the second half by pulling the ball, reading the option a lot better than he did in the first half. Because passing-wise, 9 of 18, 80 yards, 1 TD, you probably would have thought Michigan dominated, but that was not the case at all. Illinois, only 21 points, but each one of those touchdowns, each one of those touchdown and field goal drives, Sean, were really long, sustained drives. Illinois did not make the critical mistake. Luckily for them, they won the turnover battle. Barely even put the ball on the ground, I might add. And Michigan, on the other hand, completely abysmal. Jack Tuttle threw a late interception, but that wasn't even the worst turnover. Donovan Edwards, the cover athlete of NCAA 25, fumbled the ball on an 11-yard run he had that probably was going to change the game. And really, outside of Colston Loveland, Sean, Michigan could not get the ball out much. They tried to involve the other tight ends, Holgan Hansen, tried to involve Savage Morgan, some of the slot receivers, tried to be semi-creative in the play calling. But Illinois was ready for everything. It was as if Illinois spent their entire bye week not prepping for Purdue, which is probably what happened considering the last week, and all of it for Michigan. And it clearly paid off. Michigan only had one drive that was good. It was the end of the first half. But in the second half, the adjustments Illinois' defense made, and they didn't even have to adjust that much, were completely thorough because Michigan's last drive of the game was their only real good drive in the second half, and it ended in a Jack Tuttle interception where they read his eyes the whole way. So Illinois were really good for the program. I think this was probably their biggest win under Brett Bielema. Maybe you could say the Nebraska game. But I think this has certainly got to be it. First win over Michigan in 15 years, clearly rushing the field. You can have your own interpretation of that, but I think it shows the value that they placed on this game and how important it was to the program. Looking forward, it's not crazy to think Illinois could win 10 games, Sean. Sure, they're at Oregon, but they finished the year home games against Minnesota and Michigan State, a road game at Rutgers, which does not look the same, and then a game at Wrigley Field against Northwestern. Apologies, it's at the high school stadium. But either way, Sean, I find it hard to believe they won't be favored in 4 of their last 5 games, the only exception being the game in Eugene on Saturday. So, really good for Brett Bielema. I think anyone who's questioned this guy over the last 2 years, especially after 2022, I think he's answered any and all doubts. The guy's a great coach, and he's one of the unique people in the conference, Sean. He could win a conference title. He won it in the 2000s. He won one in the 2010s. He won 3 in the 2010s. And I think, Sean, he could win one in the 2020s. Certainly, maybe not this year, but it's only 2024, Sean. I'm going to make that prediction right now. I think Illinois in the next 5 or 6 years could be in Indianapolis and a team that looks very serious and a mainstay in the top 25.
Yeah, they are. They're just a good team, Joe. They don't do anything poorly. They don't do anything great either, which is kind of why they're going to be in the back end of the rankings. And, unless they do spraying the trap in Eugene this weekend, they won't be in the college football playoff. But they just do a lot of things right. And that is a sign of a good coach. And they lost a tough game at Penn State, which, Penn State's just better than them. That's really it. But I don't think they have an unbelievable amount of talent compared to these other teams in the conference. I think they actually have less talent than some of the teams that they've beaten. But they're in good hands for now at least, and we have to turn it over to Michigan, Joe. First question I'll ask you, He's the quarterback Jack Tuttle for now, and they're just going to see what he's got.
I think so. I think just passing wise, he's clearly a lot better than Alex Orji. Some people will say Davis Ward's better, but Davis Ward still turns the ball over in the air a lot more than Jack Tuttle. I think the most disappointing part has been a lot of the positions he's been in.
Yeah, that was the next one. It's why do they wait so often until third and obvious passing to let it loose? It's not going to be if you're not a good passer, that's not where you're going to figure it out. I do think a couple of the play calls were good, but when you're chasing the game, it just becomes so painfully obvious what they're doing, and you're not going to come back like that.
The way it's been assessed, Sean, is Kirk Campbell, the offensive coordinator and play caller for Michigan, thinks he still is the 2023 Michigan offense because this is what they would do last year, and they could get away with it. I mean, you had J.J. McCarthy, although he's not playing the NFL right now, he was a top 10 pick. He could run around. And let's face it, Sean, he was a guy that was a cheat code. He could get them out of a lot of situations. If he didn't have it in the air, he was going to run and get 5 yards, and Michigan would just jump over the pylon on fourth down and get it. They act like they have that this year, and it's pretty stunning that toward the end of October, they haven't figured out what to do, whether at quarterback, whether it's been at running back. Kalel Mullings was – it was amazing Kalel Mullings was – held out of the game for so long because when he did get at it, he was dominating them before Illinois readjusted. So I think that was really sloppy of Michigan. I think it's a team that has to score first at this point because in the last 2 games and really the 3 games they've lost, they've gotten behind early and then they've panicked and dug themselves a deeper hole. And although they showed some life in both the Illinois and Washington game by scoring a touchdown in both, particularly the Washington game, eventually taking the lead, it's a team that cannot dig itself a hole. And the one bit of good news is we got a 5-star tackle yesterday, Andrew Babaloa. Recruiting's a big concern. A lot of these guys at the top of their class are looking elsewhere. This is why when we preview this Saturday, it's an extremely important game.
And both of Tuttle's interceptions, Joe, are chasing the game late. I mean, you can't really blame him in either of those situations. You got to move the ball down the field if you want to win. And so I think for now he's going to be the guy, and they're going to try and figure something out with the 6th-year senior. You would think that kind of what he's shown is what he's got. But the other part of this, Joe, the coaching situation, Sharon Moore is in his first year. Very rarely is a coach a one and done, but due to the circumstances, is there a chance that he's gone after just 1 year?
I will put it to you this way, Sean. I think it's worth discussing eventually. I really think a lot of it hinges on Saturday. Michigan coaches in my lifetime, and I'll just do the history lesson now, where they've had issues. It's truthfully not been when they've lost to Ohio State. That's as frustrating to anyone. That is as frustrating to a Michigan fan as it is to anyone who has knowledge of that rivalry in the state of Michigan. What I will tell you is Jim Harbaugh had 5 cracks at Ohio State, had 6 cracks at Ohio State before he beat them. The reason he had 6 cracks is because he split the MSU games. He beat everybody else, but he split the MSU games, which isn't even that good. If you beat Michigan State, sure, a lot of people are going to be upset you didn't beat Ohio State. There is no cries louder in the state of Michigan than when you lose to Michigan State. Let's face it, Sean, it's the way the Yankees view the Mets. It's the way the Giants view the Jets. They view them as their little brother, and I'm not saying that's right or wrong. All I'm saying is
it's true, though.
When the ultimate contrast, your in-state rival beats you, especially after the year they've had last year, and being that they're also in a full-blown rebuild, with no momentum entering that rebuild, I might add, you're going to have a lot of people saying a lot of things and asking a lot more uncomfortable questions. Because as uncomfortable as they are now, believe me, Sean, if you lose to Michigan State Saturday, those questions will be magnified to the fullest extent, not just from your fan base, but also from the Michigan State fan base, because they'll have every right to ask, how after a national title, Michigan, do you have less and less momentum, and how does the outlook of your program, as of now, look worse than ours, especially if Michigan State wins Saturday. So I'm not trying to be melodramatic, Sean, but I've lived in this state, and I've been a Michigan fan, and I've known this rivalry long enough to know where if you lose this game as a Michigan head coach, you are in big, big trouble.
And Joe, they're the home team, and they're favored by just 4 points. Now, Michigan State has been incredibly inconsistent. Last week they played really well. there's certainly a more than likely chance that Michigan State could win this game. Now, I think Michigan still should win it, and will win it more times than not, but danger time and then it doesn't get much easier after that. Oregon, Indiana, and Ohio State. Bowl eligibility not a certain at this point for the Wolverines. And Joe, I do think there'll be changes either way, whether they tell him you need to find 2 new coordinators or you need to find new coaches. That's sort of the same thing as everybody out, everybody but you out. Tough hand, you get handed the reins, all that. But the in-game coaching is not great, and the recruiting is falling behind, as you mentioned, too. So a lot of questions that I don't think we're going to have the answer to for very long. But if they do lose to Michigan State, Joe, maybe that'll just answer them all for us. All right, we've got 2 games left, Joe, and I would consider both them to be upsets. And we talk a team here in USC coming across the coast in dire need of a win to College Park to play Maryland. And it was going well for the Trojans, up 21-7 at the half, but the Terrapins come back with a touchdown with under a minute left and grab a 1-point victory. All of a sudden, Lincoln Riley's Trojans are 3-4. What a colossal, terrible month for the Trojans.
John, I cannot think of how this happened. A team, and we said it last week, they could have been 2-4. They could also be 6-0. It's a team that could be 2-5, but could also be 7-0. And the statement is the same, except you just got to add a number to each of the extremes of those situations. They asked Lincoln Riley at the end of the games why his team was so bad. He didn't know, and I'm not blaming Lincoln for not knowing because I don't think anyone else could quite figure it out. It's amazing. I think part of it's got to be coaching, the lack of certain aggression at the end, but I also think if you're winning in a game and you trust your defense, you have to trust your defense to a certain extent. You can't go for these 4th downs. Kicking the field goal was the right move. It's just each one of these is backfiring. I think partially it's got to be bad luck, but at the end of the day, Sean, you're 3-4 USC. You're a team that can beat top 10 teams. You beat one, you should have beat the other, and you're 3-4. That's so frustrating. And I don't even want to give Maryland way too much credit because I thought these 2 teams kind of deserved to play each other, as terrible as that might sound. I thought Miller Boss played a good game. I thought he really dotted up their defense. But Billy Edwards Jr., 373 yards, really was ineffective on the ground. Didn't do all too much. Only had like a few carries for over 5 or 6 yards. But through the air, 373 yards, 2 TDs. Certainly missed some throws, but he was effective enough to get Maryland the victory. And, Sean, the only way I describe this game is USC is in some trouble. Maryland's kind of like Rutgers. They're kind of doing their standard thing. They're kind of flirting with bowl eligibility, losing a game they shouldn't. This was a game they won that they shouldn't have. So it's the status quo for them. But USC being a new team in the conference, 1-4, that is... It's beyond comment for me at this point. I want to hear your take.
It's probably an effort that is enough for a victory in the old Pac-12. And I know that conference was good last year, but in previous years, you go on the road, you play well early on. Most of the time, that's going to be enough. Now, I do think Maryland deserves some credit, but I don't think they did anything that they don't usually do. Billy Edwards let it eat, he let it fly, and they lost. Like, their defense just crumbled under pressure. Now, I do think, looking back at it, they were lucky to win that LSU game where you had another coach who's not good in close big games down the stretch, and he just outdid it. But when you get a decent game from your quarterback and a good game from your running back on the road, you have to win. And they didn't. And what looked like a college football playoff team all of a sudden is now 3-4, and a really, really tough start to life in the Big Ten. And, Joe, at the looks of it, is other than Oregon, who is by far a top 5 team in the country at the worst, the other 3 teams are really struggling to find any kind of consistency in the Big Ten, of the 4 teams that came over from the Pac-12. And this was a game that I didn't really watch all of, but I kept tabs on it, and it's just why on earth did they lose this game? They had it. They played well enough in the first half to really put it away, and then when you don't do that and you get a quarterback who gets hot, this sort of thing can happen. But annoying from USC to lose this, and they've got just one more ranked game this year. That's against Notre Dame at home, but at this point, with 4 losses, Joe, it's getting to a bowl is really all you can get. So USC definitely needs to improve down the stretch to salvage this first season in the Big Ten. All right, Joe, the last game of Saturday, Big Ten Saturday night from Spartan Stadium in East Lansing. The Michigan State Spartans pick up an impressive win over Iowa, 32-20. Aiden Childs, well enough, 250 yards passing, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. And Joe, we do criticize kickers a lot, rightfully so, but that means we got to praise them when they do well too. Jonathan Kim, 6 field goals, including 4 over 40 yards and 1 over 50 yards. They end up winning by 12, but there's the points right there. Michigan State, as inconsistent as they are, means you got to be good some of the time, and they were here.
God, they were phenomenal here. I think outside of the 1 interception, this was as good a performance as Aiden Childs has had against a really good defense and a really good defensive coordinator. I thought Phil Parker was going to trap Aiden Childs a lot in this game. I thought he was going to force him into making some bad decisions. That did not happen much at all. I thought on the ground he was great. I think when they run the read option, they're a really scary team to play, especially if Childs is getting going through the air. Nick Marsh, Montori Foster Jr., those are guys that can take the top off of defense. Nick Marsh more so than Montori, but Sean, Michigan State, this was a monumental win, and I'm going to stop using the word monumental. I've said it 30 times, but this shows as a program, they're ahead of schedule. This was a game in September they would lose because Childs would probably throw 2 or 3 more interceptions, and that's what Iowa thrives off. Their game plan was impeccable. They told Iowa's offense, we're going to make Cade McNamara beat us. We're not going to let Caleb Johnson beat us. Outside of the 75-yard TD run, Sean, to kind of cut the deficit to 4 or 5 at the time, he had 13 carries for 23 yards. That's it. And then Cade McNamara, unlike the 2021 Michigan Cade McNamara, 11 of 23, 150 yards, threw a pick as well. Completely ineffective. And his leading receiver was Caleb Johnson. Couldn't really get the ball to Luke Lachey as much. I thought taking the tight end out of the game bodes well for Michigan State in their upcoming matchup. But focusing into this game, Sean, I want to focus on Iowa. Really disappointing. I thought this was a team that we projected. Sure, we knew they were going to lose in Columbus, but we thought in the rest of their games they would be favored. And they were favored by a touchdown in this game, Sean. And it completely blew up in their face. And now we're talking a team that's likely going to make a bowl game, like Nebraska. But when you had the start they had, and when you have the kind of defense they have, and the offense has improved the way it has, to have a disappointing effort from both sides of the ball on this one, Sean, it kind of takes away a lot of the luster for the rest of their season. I think getting to 9 wins would be really good for Iowa, but the way it's been playing out this year, Sean, you can't trust them in a lot of these games. And this was a team I thought could have made Indianapolis, not because they were a top 2 or even top 5 team in this conference, but because of that schedule. And they couldn't win this one. I do think their season's going to be viewed as a disappointment unless they win all of these next 5 games and win their bowl games. So the talks of Ferrett's retiring, I think it's a little absurd after 1 game, but I do think those rumors pick up steam when you have performances like this.
Yep. You just expected more out of Iowa, but credit to Michigan State because we have seen a couple of teams actually get an offensive rhythm against Iowa this year, and that is when things go badly. They cannot overcome a good offensive couple series.
Or a 2-score deficit like Michigan. They can't overcome it, period.
And, I think those 2 teams are similar. Now they're not playing this year, but it would be interesting to see what happens there. But Michigan State, inconsistent, I think, in a good way because you wanted to find enough wins to get into the middle of the pack. And, they're kind of just going to have to roll with this. Childs is around for a while. good for them. But if you're Iowa, you don't want to roll with this sort of inconsistency because you wanted to get to 9 wins. You wanted to get to the top of the league. And for now, Joe, it seems like they're going to finish in a pretty similar spot. And that's good news for one of them and not for the other. So that is all the games from Week 8. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We're going to split up the episodes this week. Week 9 recap tomorrow night, or Week 9 preview tomorrow night.